You're listening to the Peace Corner with a group of young, peace-hungry interns at GPPAC, the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict. In a world riddled with violent conflict, peace can feel elusive, and peacebuilding can sound abstract. We want to change that with the Peace Corner. Who are the people breaking away from the discourses of hate and violence and transforming the status quo? What personally drives these people to peacebuilding? There are many stories of peace, some which inspire us, fill us with hope, and others which make us hungry for change. Each podcast, we talk to a different peace builder about their own personal experience in the field, from Nicaragua to Palestine and beyond. This is a chance to hear from the people putting themselves on the line for peace, the people who remain steadfast in their pursuit of more peaceful societies, and who, incidentally, are delightful to talk to. So nestle into a corner and listen to the voices making peace possible.
There are little places in the world shrouded with as much mystery as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Our understanding of this lonely country usually surrounds a government which isolates itself and its citizens in its own understanding of the world. Imagine then my surprise when I heard that one of our very members is engaging with civil society in that country. Imagine then my double surprise that one of such members would be in The Hague in our office. With such a unique opportunity, I just had to sit down with Mary Joyce to discuss the ins and outs of this peculiar engagement. As I prepared for this interview, I came across Mary's unique work environment, the Peaceboat. Yes, it is a peace boat. The name sounds exactly what it is, a boat cruise that goes around the world furthering the mission of peace building. Curious? Well, so was I. Hi everyone, welcome to the Peace Corner. I'm Raphael and I'm sitting today with Mary from Peaceboat, and we are going to have a chat about their work in Northeast Asia and a bit of the work of Peaceboat itself. So hi Mary, welcome to the Peace Corner.
Hi, thank you very much. Good to be with you.
Why don't you start us off by introducing yourself a little bit?
Sure. So as you've mentioned, my name is Mary Joyce. I'm based at an organization called Peaceboat, which is a Tokyo-based international NGO, and we're coordinating the Northeast Asia network of GPPAC.
Cool. And you are in Japan, but your background's from Australia, correct?
That's right. Yes, yes.
How did you get to that? Like, what was the journey to get to Japan and to be working at Peaceboat?
Sure. It was a lot of coincidences along the way. There was never really a definite decision that was made, but I first studied in Japan, actually, when I was in high school and then university as well, and found myself going back more and more, and then turned around one day and there you are. That's it. Yeah.
And the work that you guys are doing with GPPAC Northeast Asia, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because you're working with the Korean Peninsula, correct?
That's right, yeah. So we're based in Tokyo, but within the GPPAC Northeast Asia network, we have members in Tokyo, in Kyoto, in Seoul, Beijing, Shanghai, Nanjing, Taipei, and Hong Kong, as well as also Ulaanbaatar and Vladivostok, so including Mongolia and Far East Russia in the network, which is quite unusual, I think. And we also have partners in Pyongyang in North Korea who we're working with as well.
That's very unique.
Yeah, it's quite unusual, of course, having their participation, but also having such an inclusive and really comprehensive network in the region is something that I think is quite unique to GPPAC.
For sure. And with the partnerships in Pyongyang, how did that come about?
Sure. Over a lot of time and a lot of building up relationships and sort of coming to common agreement in terms of shared acknowledgement that in order to actually resolve any of the issues that are being faced both on the Korean Peninsula but in Northeast Asia in general, that we really need to have a space for citizens from the whole region to come together and actually even to start to have a conversation about these issues.
The basis of dialogue. Exactly. Yeah, because it's a region that we don't really think much about the dialogue of the people itself, right? And that has to happen.
It's true. And I mean, it's a region where the historical legacies from, the Japanese colonial history in the region, the lack of reconciliation following World War II, and a lot of real tensions amongst the states in the region are still there. Especially, I mean, in the case of North Korea is a very strong example there. But, there's not diplomatic relations with a lot of the countries in the region. There's still the ongoing conflict, the division of the Korean Peninsula and so on. So within those structures, we often think of it as it's really one of the parts of the world where the Cold War is still going on. And this actually really has a huge impact on the relations of citizens in the region as well. Even in those countries which are quite friendly in some ways, there is not much space for exchange, even just on, the cultural or personal levels as well. So even
That's
just starting that conversation is something we find really important.
That's fascinating because being I'm from Brazil, I'm based in Europe, I've never actually had that much contact with the region, but you don't really think about how there actually still is such a differentiation from the people itself.
Yeah. I think it's, when you're looking at it from the outside, it's very easy to see, there's things happening all in a certain part of the world, and there's very close historical ties at the same time, but the impacts and the legacies from that period of colonialism and then World War II is still very strong in the region, actually.
Interesting. And you've been working there for some time now. How, looking back, because you've been there for 10 years, even a bit longer?
A little bit longer, yeah.
So looking back when you started and looking now, how do you think things changed?
Sure. Well, I think in the experience of GPPAC, I joined quite soon after GPPAC was launched. But of course, there'd been several years of leading up to that in the network and within both the region and globally as well. But in terms of the participation from North Korea, for example, in the first few years, it was very difficult to even have sort of communication channels and to try and get, even messages going back and forth and so on. However, in recent years, we've been able to lead up to actually the point where we have very regular contact, very regular participation in our annual regional meetings, in different exchange programs that we're organizing, in trainings and so on even as well. So I think it shows that these kind of building up the networks in regions where relations are so tense takes a lot of time, and it might seem like things are not really moving much at all. But if you're willing to be able to stay patient and sort of continue to reach out and create that kind of space, then eventually it is possible to start to at least do something with that.
And what kind of impacts have you seen already from that engagement with North Korea in terms of mindset change, or even just shared humanity maybe between the participants of these workshops? What has some results that you've seen?
Sure. I think when you come into a situation like this, there's such little or limited information available about each other. Even when you're only a few hundred kilometers away by distance, to actually have any direct information about how citizens in Pyongyang are seeing the situation. When there are these, huge things that we're seeing on the news every day. We see about the different military aspects, we see about the tensions and the ups and downs on the state relations side of things, but to actually have an opportunity to hear how that is seen by people on the ground, how that affects their lives, how, in terms of the government level side of things, but also even in terms of, the sanctions that are being put in by the UN, for example, what impact that actually has on local organizations that are trying to do humanitarian work in terms of, health or humanitarian things, disaster relief, these sorts of things as well. So being able to have that direct conversation, even if you're not agreeing on everything, and most of the time, we're not, that's the beauty of a network like this, it is being able to bring together groups with different positions. But have a chance for actually just learning about each other, learning about where they're coming from, what are the historical backgrounds and the sort of reasons that have brought us to the situation we're in today.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And you kind of already touched a bit onto the point of my next question, which was about, this is a conflict where it's very high level political. We see very much statesmen's games here and there. But what we often forget is about the local grassroots level and how that reconciliation and that conversations and that peacebuilding process from bottom up will also have to happen in the future, or at least that's what we assume from our perspective. So how do you see that happening, in the future? And can it even happen? Is it just so far-fetched in the future that we have to do one step at a time? What's the role for grassroots peacebuilding in such a highly politicized context?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the ongoing challenges, but it's also, I think those kind of cultural exchanges on a very small level has for many years been really the only platform that there has been that kind of opportunity for engagement. Even, prior to the launch of GPPAC as a network, Peaceboat, for example, had been organizing youth exchanges, cultural exchanges, sports exchanges, and so on in the region broadly, but also including North Korea. And it kind of shows that when there is these complete stalemates on the political situation, it is some kind of an opportunity to at least keep the channels open. What we found in the past year, where we have finally actually seen some positive developments on the political level, or, the so-called state level about the Korean Peninsula, it's meant that thanks to there being these different, cultural level exchanges, citizens' engagements and so on in place, it's meant that once there is finally positive movements, there's already a space where conversations about how to make the most of that opportunity, or how civil society organizations can work to help support the implementation of these agreements which are being made. And because without the buy-in of the citizens in any of the countries involved, there's no way that these agreements are going to be anything more than a piece of paper.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, and again, like, we hear so little about the local grassroots movement from the outside. And so for us, I can only speak for myself, but having studied political science for the past 4 years, I have never even thought that was a layer of work, but it very much is.
Yeah. And I mean, it's very, very small steps, very, it may sometimes be hard to feel that there's much being achieved, but I think just keeping that persistence and keeping it going means that when there can be actually developments, then you're in place to be able to somehow support that from moving forward more.
And from you, and from your personal context, like, do you have any like anecdote or like any little, not story, but I want to say like a moment that comes to your mind when you're seeing that engagement of someone who is so far away?
Oh, that's a good question. Where to start? I mean, I think there's a lot of the small situations as well. There's, with these kind of dialogues or citizens' engagements and so on, of course, the different discussions that you have within the meeting rooms are always important, having a sense of, the political aspects or historical aspects and so on. But I think most of the time it's the really small sideline things that are going on where, you're in a situation and, in the coffee break, you turn around and you have your North and South Korean participants taking a selfie together, in a situation where in normal context, it's completely impossible for them to even be in the same room. Or, we're sitting here in The Hague at the moment. We've had a series of exchange visits for our partners from Pyongyang to come to The Hague to learn about how civil society works, how different international organizations based here in The Hague are working and so on. And I remember, the first such visit we organized, we had one of the quite senior participants who was coming from the DPRK, and we had some time to also visit some of the museums here as well during a free day off on the weekend. And I remember he was standing in front of one of the Rembrandt paintings and said he'd seen this painting for 40 years in his life and never thought there would ever be a time when he'd actually see it in person.
I got goosebumps just hearing that.
I mean, the fact that you can facilitate those kind of human moments and showing how culture and art can go beyond borders in this kind of way is something that shows kind of what a human network like GPPAC can do.
That's fascinating. I mean, and actually that's a good point segueing to this other part of the conversations that I wanted to talk to you about, which is actually about Peaceboat and the work that you guys do with Peaceboat. Because this role of culture and this role of mutual understanding from the website seems a lot. That's what's a bit of the core of Peaceboat. So can you, for the people who have no idea what Peaceboat is, can you tell us a bit of what it is?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think, as you said, that's very much the fundamental principles or the background of what drives what we do as Peaceboat. So Peaceboat is a Japanese NGO. It was started by a group of university students in Japan back in 1983. So we're just on our 35th anniversary this year.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah. At the time, it was when there was a real increase in tensions between Japan and its neighbors over a controversy about history textbooks, actually. There was some very strong protests going on in China and Korea and other parts of the region when Japan made some changes to its history textbooks. So sort of, getting rid of the words invasion and changing it to advancement or these kind of things. So these Japanese students were seeing on the news every day these protests, people out on the streets. But of course, in what they were hearing in their media, they weren't really understanding what it was that people were getting mad about. So they decided they wanted to go firsthand, talk to students in some of these other Asian countries. But at the time, being in 1983, they couldn't afford to get on a plane and travel. So they found themselves traveling by boat to different countries in the Asia Pacific. First of all, just thinking it was the cheaper method of transportation. But then once they actually got on board, they realized that the space when you're at sea, where you're not belonging to any particular country, any national borders, it's nobody's space. So actually using that for different workshops and dialogue and cultural events was really useful. So from there, they started to organize these trips quite regularly, growing from a small group to several hundred people to 1,000 people. And then in the 90s, they started to move from, rather than just one-off trips in the Asia Pacific and just looking at peace and reconciliation issues, also seeing how this is all linked also with sustainability, with the environment, with economic justice. And so moved to organizing global voyages from there. So now we organize 3 global voyages each year with 1,000 people on board. And also regional voyages as well, which sort of looking back at the roots and the sort of Northeast Asian reconciliation side of things too.
And what's the makeup of that crowd?
Sure. It's majority Japanese, but in the past few years that's been expanding to a lot of other people from other Asian countries as well. So even on board, we also have quite a lot of people from mainland China, from Singapore, from Taiwan. So it's also that kind of living together in that space is in itself, you know, a peace-building process as we're going along. It's a mix of not only young people and not only people who are already interested in these global issues. Some people are coming on more for a way to see the world in a kind of different way, whereas some people are really coming on because they're joining our campaigns or, you know, in support of the different sort of more activist side of things that we're doing as well. So it's quite diverse.
And you go on these global voyages around the world, around these different ports, and in each of them, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you have engagements with local organizations and local partners.
Exactly.
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's
so
right.
So how do you guys work together with them? And is there like before and after process? How does that work with the people on board?
Sure. It's quite organic, and it varies in terms of, you know, some of the ports we visit very regularly, several times a year, whereas sometimes it may be only once every few years and so on. We organize, sometimes it's more study programs, so, you know, field visits or exposures. Sometimes it's symposiums at universities or with students, and sometimes also joint advocacy or campaigns. So we also like to see how the ship can be used by our local partners in a way, whether it's to attract more media attention for the work that they're doing, whether it's a way to show international solidarity or support for a campaign they may be doing locally. And we actually do a lot of this with GPPAC partners around the world as well. Of course, being part of this network means that we already have these great connections and people that we're working with around the world. So, you know, whether we go to, you know, Fiji or to Mexico or Colombia, we also work with GPPAC partners in those countries as well to see how the ship can be used as a space for supporting what they're doing locally.
Oh, wow, that's really cool. And have you ever been to one of these voyages? I'm guessing you have.
I have several times.
Several times.
Yes.
Okay. I have so many questions about that. So how does it feel to be on that environment with just like 1,000 people wanting to discuss about development and peace building, but also wanting to explore the world? It must be kind of this like surreal experience in a way.
It is. I mean, it's kind of like a floating village in a way as well. You know, you get people from all backgrounds, from all generations as well, which is one of the things that was most surprising to me when I first joined as well, is that kind of discussions and exchange between people from, you know, generations, you know, those who did experience the war, for example, to those who never even maybe knew that Japan was at war with some of these other countries, you know, these kind of things as well. But yeah, it's all sorts of people on board, but it ends up a real, you know, 3 months at sea together. You do form quite a community by the end.
I can imagine. Yeah. And there's also because it's a Japanese organization, I'm assuming a lot of the language is Japanese, but also English. Yeah. How is that language as a tool for peace in that boat? Like, how does that work?
Sure, yeah. That's actually how I first became involved in the organization. Okay. I joined as a volunteer interpreter on board. So as you said, Japanese is the main language that's used on board, but we have a team of volunteers who are there to support, of course, translating or interpreting for the different lectures and workshops, which are being held by the guest speakers on board, and also with the different exchanges in the ports that we're visiting, but also the different, you know, conversations and exchange between people as they're living together on the ship as well. So we have teams of English and Spanish interpreters for that, and in recent years as well, also Chinese and Korean too. So it's a very, very big team of very hardworking volunteers that make all of that happen.
A question that kind of came up with that is also, you have this cruise which is going around the world and creating all these spaces for engagement, but on the other hand, you have this work with the region and we're engaging in North Korea and this dialogue and mediation. So as I was reading the website, I was like, but they do this and they do that. It was a bit surprising to me how it can have such a different portfolio and still make sense into this one umbrella. So How does that work? Like, you know, you have a cruise on one hand, but you're also doing like workshops and dialogues. How did that come about?
It's quite an unusual organization.
Yeah, it's very unique.
It's sometimes a little bit hard to, you know, just say in one phrase what it is that we do. But I mean, I think that what we really learn from these global voyages is how all of these issues are really connected together, and how Peaceboat itself can be a platform for bringing together different groups or different people who are working on different issues, and show how it is all connected and how it can support each other in that sense. And having the sort of backing of being a large enough organization with the institution of the voyages that we have means that we have perhaps more space to do some more unusual or innovative things, which is not necessarily possible for all organizations. I think the main reason for that is we run the voyages almost like a social business. So the income that we have from the voyages is what actually feeds in to support all of our campaigns and advocacy and so on. So it means we're completely self-sustainable and independent on that. So we're not reliant on donor preferences or any of this kind of thing, which when you're working with countries like North Korea is crucial.
For sure. Yeah, that was actually something that I was interested in asking as well. Like, you found a way of making peace not commercial, but to make it commercially viable or sustainably viable, and having a way of, because I think that's the issue that a lot of our, like, I will go on the limb, so 95% of our members have that issue. How do you continue to have sustainable income?
And I mean, it's always a challenge as well, the balance between ensuring that you're commercially viable as the social business, but at the same time being able to ensure that that's not taking over everything or, you know, dictating that sort of thing as well. So, I mean, as an organization, we're the largest NGO in Japan, especially in terms of staff numbers. We have probably close to 150 full-time staff, which on the surface level sounds huge, but when you also think about operating cruises with 5,000 passengers every year, there's a huge amount of staff time and work and energy goes into, of course, that logistical and operations and working with the different participants who are coming on board as well. So there's always a challenge of, you know, division of time and resources within the organization too. But it means that, you know, we can be fully independent and flexible as well. You know, we can, you know, just answering to ourselves rather than having to work on donor cycles and that sort of thing too.
Oh, tell me when you come to The Hague with the boat. I think for me, last question. I mean, we can talk all day long, but another question. Like, I think just a bit of a wrap-up question from that voyage. Can you tell us one moment that you were like, okay, this is the aha moment. This is a very special.
Sure.
Special case.
Yeah. That's tricky. I guess one of the things which I think we're especially proud of how we've been able to use the voyages to contribute in a larger way is our involvement in the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, which was the very lucky recipient of the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize last year. So we have been working together as a core member of ICAN from quite early on. But one of our main ways that we do that actually is we work with survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki who travel on board the Peaceboat and share their testimony in different countries that we're visiting, whether it's at schools with children's groups, whether it's to presidents of countries, whether it's at the United Nations. But really using the ships actually directly visiting these places to create these human connections and share this, you know, firsthand experience of what nuclear weapons really means. So showing that these are not just weapons that we're talking about on a strategic level. They're not just things which are, you know, talked about on pieces of paper, but these are things which actually have these huge catastrophic impacts on people's lives. And so ICAN was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize because of its role in bringing to realization the nuclear ban treaty at the UN last year. And a huge part of that was also highlighting the humanitarian aspects of nuclear weapons. So I think by being able to use the ship actually physically traveling to different places and sharing these human perspectives and human stories was a way to help to support this movement to really show the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. And so we're very, very proud of the role that we were able to have in achieving the nuclear ban treaty and then also the work that ICAN's been continuing since then.
And I guess also just allowing those stories to be heard, right? And sharing those stories to people from all over the world.
Exactly. Yeah, being able to physically transport that and have a chance to share that directly is really key.
That's fascinating and very, very exciting model that you guys are working on. So So thank you so much for sitting down with us and sharing a bit your work and your life story. And
Thank you. It's been great to chat.
well, that's it for today's episode of the Peace Corner. Thank you for listening to the voices making peace possible. Tune in next time when our youth peace and security intern Hilola talks to Darinero Rodriguez Torres about creating a culture of peace in Colombia.